He's the guy that wants to bring us driverless cars and, by the way, put millions of people on Mars. Elon Musk, a leader in technological innovation, is apparently scared to death of robots. Over the weekend, the chief executive of Tesla and founder of SpaceX had this to say about artificial intelligence.
If I were to guess at what our biggest existential threat is, it's probably that. So we need to be very careful with artificial intelligence. With artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know all those stories where there's the guy with the pentagram and the holy water, and he's like, yeah, he's sure he can control the demon. Doesn't work out.
It's not the first time Musk has made alarmist comments about AI. Back in August, he said it was potentially more dangerous than nukes. Before that, he said, there have been movies about this, like Terminator. There are some scary outcomes, and we should try to make sure the outcomes are good, not bad. Well, yes. Are those warnings justified, though, or is Musk a little too paranoid? Those questions kick off our first Digital Divide panel. Leonard Brody is a tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist. Daniel Debow, Senior Vice President of Emerging Technologies at Salesforce.com. And Daniel, I'm going to start with you and say, this is a smart guy. We're not here to make fun of Elon Musk. And frankly, if he's saying it, it's partly the reason we sit up and pay attention. Summoning the demon.
Yeah, I mean, I think the language is probably unfortunate, but I think it's worth paying attention to what he's saying, and I think it's also important to parse carefully what he's saying, right? I mean, it's great media, it's a great story, but I don't think he's saying tomorrow we should worry about our toasters taking over the world. I think what he's saying is this is a very fast, accelerating space. He's an investor in it. I'm also an investor in some AI businesses.
Yep.
And it's surprising. We are starting to encounter it in our day-to-day life. Siri, for example, is a form of AI.
Sure.
But what he's saying is there's a very small possibility of something very bad happening, so we should be thoughtful about it. And I think that's a reasonable frame of mind, especially given the potential power of AI to change our world.
So Leonard, let's talk about what we're talking about here. Artificial intelligence, as Daniel alludes, I mean, it can be as small and limited as things Google is working on. It can be Siri. It can be anything that kind of anticipates, I suppose, or learns from us. What Elon is talking about is something far down the road, more like the singularity, right, where the machine and the human merge, if I'm right about that.
Yeah, I think he's talking about different forms of AI, which we all know exist. As Daniel said, we use it in our daily lives today just through Siri. I use it in other forms daily. I think what Elon is referring to is as we get to a place where robots are much more active in our day-to-day lives that we interact with in the way we would with other human beings. And I think what he's referring to is when they start to play human-like forms and have human-like thinking processes, do we have to get to a place where we're careful about how that interacts with the real human beings on the planet? And I think we're a ways away from that, but caution note is pretty important.
So in terms of the approach you would take, you are investing in it. How are we cautious while letting this thing develop in what might be an exponential fashion?
Sure, I think the first step is what he's describing right now, which is people should be aware of it. 20 years ago, people talked about the idea of an asteroid hitting our planet, and it was science fiction. It turns out that there's actually a real, very small possibility, but it would be very bad if it occurred.
Could happen at any second.
And so people are spending time and energy thinking about it. So I think that's the first point, just being aware that this is happening, and that it's not really science fiction AI, it's science fiction what he's talking about, but he's saying, let's know that there's a path. I think the second is to identify dangerous areas. So one area, and it's actually, there's some great people in Canada who are working on this, is sort of killer robots. You used it in the intro. There literally is a program called the Campaign Against Killer Robots, and that is, how do we manage the idea of military-grade AI getting autonomy over weapons? And that's probably something that we should be focusing in on right away, because that could be very dangerous right away.
So I guess, Leonard, what I would say is, when somebody says the Terminator is a movie and we don't want that to come true, I think we'll all agree we don't want killer robots. That would be bad. But in a lesser way, so far what we've found with technology is if it's possible and it has a benign side, it does happen. So if you'd said 10 years ago, there's going to be a company and it wants to accumulate all the information about everybody in the world and do stuff with it, you would probably say, well, that sounds bad. I'm not talking about the US government, by the way. I'm talking about Google. And now we say, well, it's relatively benign and we can regulate it and it's okay. Is it possible that we cannot anticipate how AI will develop? We're just going to have to watch it happen.
Well, firstly, I don't know why there's this assumption that killer robots are a bad thing. When I'm stuck in traffic, seems all right to me.
No.
Look, I think you cannot foresee, as nobody was able to foresee the inevitable route of where the internet took us. You're not going to be able to know where AI is going to take us. I think you have to have a plan and a path in place to watch and be careful and to understand where it crosses into areas of illegality and immorality that we would think would affect everybody and the entire population. But trying to put a bow on it or wrap a bow on it and figure out where it's going to go is going to be impossible, just like it was with the internet.
And I think one thing we don't want to do, a very bad idea, would be to kind of outlaw it. Say no research into AI, no discussion about that.
Yeah.
That would be terrible. It'll just force it underground. I think part of the reason Elon Musk is concerned about it is, unlike a nuclear weapon, which is like a nation state needs to do it, AI and the advance of the cloud, the global nature of internet and computational capacity of people means people can start doing things at smaller scale. Anyone.
So Leonard could make a weapons-grade robot.
Well, I don't know about that.
And has.
I hope he hasn't.
I think what he's saying is, look, he sees where this curve is going, and it's important. It's not a linear straight line. He's saying this is a curve that's going to go up very fast. And so, I think it's beyond that. I think it's beyond just saying, no, don't do anything or just be cautious. It's also encouraging the scientists involved to talk about what they're doing, to be transparent about their research, to think about mechanisms that we can put in place to safeguard it. And the good news is I think these conversations are starting to happen.
Yeah.
The one note of caution is if you do talk to a lot of people who are deep in the AI field, not to say he's not, many of them are very skeptical. They say, look, it's a long way off. We have a ways to go before we get anything close to human intelligence. It might be very, very capable, but that doesn't mean that it's intelligent the way we think about it.
And I think it's worth noting, I just spent some time with Ray Kurzweil, who is, you could call the father of artificial intelligence because of all of his patents and inventions. He's very optimistic about it being used for good, not evil, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what will happen. I want to talk about Apple Pay because we learned today that 2 major U.S. retailers, CVS and Rite Aid, say they will not accept Apple Pay. Daniel, I want to start with you and ask, first of all, your take on this. This was seen as a potential game changer in mobile payment. Now we're sort of seeing some players saying, well, we may go a different way. What's your take on whether this is going to be as big a deal as people first thought?
Yeah, well, I think it will be a big deal. I think the big deal about Apple is that they have a great habit of making things even easier than they already are today. And let's be clear, like, here's my wallet. I can pull it out and use a credit card. It's not that hard. They're going to make it even easier. I think they want to extend it to wearables, and I think it can be a game changer. They've got a very simple solution. Let's be clear about what they did. They didn't turn off Apple Pay. They turned off near-field communication. So if anyone's ever tapped something in any of these stores, they said, we don't want that to happen anymore, which is a way for them to block Apple. Now, behind the scenes, what's happening is there's a competing standard, right? All the big retailers, or a lot of the big retailers, don't want to pay credit card fees anymore. So they've banded together and said, we've got a new process, a new app that you can use to basically tap into your debit account. And I think that's probably the dynamic of what's happening here. I think at the end of the day, if what they've got is so much easier than the vendor-driven system, I think Apple will still win.
Leonard, do you have a view on that? Will Apple Pay be the big game changer?
Yeah, I mean, I think all mobile wallets will be a form of game changers in certain capacities, whether you're an Android user or an Apple user. Certainly Apple has a way of making things more elegant and easier to use. But the fact that these guys are going to effectively wall garden their stores and keep Apple Pay out is ludicrous. It's like shutting down Wi-Fi in your store. Inevitably, you go where your customers go, and if the customers are using it, and you're going to be foolish enough to think that you're going to be able to block them out, you're simply going to lose the business. So inevitably, these kinds of stances end up seeing people have to retreat anyway. But what's interesting about Apple Pay is not the payment piece alone. It's what they're going to be using Apple Pay for in the future, things like ID and secure ID, opening doors. So that's going to be really, really problematic because I guarantee you, currency, which is the system they're using, is pretty much thinking just about payments at best.
So there's that problem, Leonard, but do we also have to worry about security in this world? Is Apple Pay secure, especially once it starts extending into all of those other places?
Yeah, I mean, you roll back the tape to 1997 when we were first starting on e-commerce on the web and everybody was panicked about it. I mean, the reality is you have a way greater risk of having credit card fraud by leaving your signature on a table in a restaurant than you do by having it taken and lifted over the internet. So there's always going to be this mass issue. There's way less fraud as it goes through to NFC payments than there are with regular credit card payments. So everyone will focus on the one blip and the one mistake, but in the end, it's very secure.
Right, it's worth pointing out that in the case of the way Apple's designed it, first of all, nothing is ever perfectly secure, but I think people have put an enormous amount of effort to make things much more robust. As Leonard pointed out, it's a much more robust system. In the case of the Apple Pay system, the vendor or the merchant doesn't get your credit card information, and Apple doesn't know what you purchased. So arguably, it's got some security features that are great than what we currently do, versus the vendor-supported currency, which was mentioned out, currency, so it's not currency. We'll see if it's more secure in what ways and in how people adopt the two of them.
All right, that's the digital divide. Daniel Debow, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having us.
Leonard, Brody, great to have you on board.